Good day everyone and welcome to the HJW Gaming channel. This is going to be the start of a new small series of videos just designed to show you guys some tips and tricks of the intricacies of war in Lord of the Rings Rise to War, in the hope that I can make yourself and your faction a little bit more effective. This one's going to be on very basic tips, but there will be intermediate and advanced tips coming in future videos. I really hope you enjoy. So, the first thing I'm going to cover in this video is your settlement position. Your settlement is one of the most powerful tools for PvP. Placing it within a good range of the front line of battle will ensure you have very short reinforce times. So if you can, as my faction mates here have done, you want to always try and relocate right to the front line of war. There are several reasons you would do this. The first is if you get hit by an enemy commander and you enter the draw state, if the opponent commander decides to wait out that 5 minutes to see if he would win the draw, if your reinforcement time is under 5 minutes, you could actually refill your commander to catch your opponent off guard. Once you've refilled your army and the draw timer runs out, he would expect to still be hitting a half full army, but instead meets your full force, and therefore will likely lose that draw. So you can pick up some really easy wins right off the bat from that trick. Another advantage to this is of course travel times. If you have to send your commanders from your settlement to your fort before you can even enter the fray of battle, you've already wasted a large amount of times where your fellow faction mates or fellowship mates might need support. So you want to be able to enter battle as quickly as possible. There are of course quite a few other benefits, but my advice is just to almost always try and relocate as close to the front line as possible. There are occasions where putting it too close to the war front can, put your settlement at a small amount of risk. However, as you're within your own territory, if your opponent doesn't have war buff if they do break through and get to your settlement, they will suffer a 70% reduction to their siege damage, so it will take them a very long time to destroy your fort anyway. This is huge in early game, particularly with massive long cooldown times between war declarations, so they'll have to waste a huge amount of stamina to take down your settlement. So whilst you might get relocated, you've actually massively burned through a lot of the resources of your opponents. And if you do get relocated, it's not the end of the world. You get the option of a nice store pack, which includes a relocate and a stamina potion. You get sent off to somewhere else in your faction's territory, and you lose a very small portion of your stored resources. That's about it. There's no actual downside for being relocated, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So my second tip is based around what do you do if your settlement is in a risky location and you're either out of stamina or you need to go offline for a period of time. How do you prevent troop and resource loss if you are at risk of your settlement being hit? First thing you need to do is you need to go into your troop menu for all of your commanders in your settlement and remove all of their troops. If your settlement is hit whilst you're away, you won't suffer troop loss except for the troops that are on your commanders. Troops in barracks are perfectly safe and can be reallocated to your commanders once you come back online again. The next thing you should do is spend as many of your resources as possible conscripting troops or building structures. So whilst you're away, if you do get hit and relocated, the opponent will only gain a very tiny amount of your resources. And if you have no resources at all, they'll gain almost nothing. So they'll have wasted huge amounts of stamina just to get basically nothing. My third tip relates to effectively using the guard function on your commanders. So guarding is the act of placing your commander in guard mode so he protects all adjacent fellowship-owned tiles. When you do this, you'll see like little wooden palisades on all the tiles being guarded. This doesn't provide any defense boosts or anything like that, but it means that if an opponent was to hit any of those adjacent tiles, not just the one that your commander's on, your commander will do battle to protect that tile. So it's an effective way to protect multiple tiles without using stamina to march in between loads of different tiles. So if you're under attack by an opponent, you don't have to dance around. You can just press guard and he'll guard all adjacent tiles and save you precious stamina. Additionally, you can actually catch people by surprise by activating guard at the last second before an army lands on an empty tile. So if they think it's going to be an easy take just to grab the tile and go on, you can then have a commander stand next to it and click guard just as they're about to hit the tile. And then if they've sent a commander who's a tiler or a sieger, so with low level or troops, they'll get demolished and sent home by your battle commander, meaning that you've used up a huge amount of their resources for no gain at all for them. If it's a strong commander, you might have a draw, but it's not the end of the world because you still fought battle and defended those tiles with the draw. Tip number 4 is how to effectively bounce enemies. So bouncing refers to when an army lands on a tile but cannot legally attack that tile upon landing. This can happen for multiple different reasons. The first of which is if the neutral tile was captured before they could land. So that's where if the opponent is targeting a neutral tile and you hit it first, take the tile, the opponent will not do battle on that tile when he hits it. He'll effectively turn around and just march straight back to where he started. Similarly, this can happen if there's no connecting tiles to the tile they would hit. So whereas usually you can only move 2 tiles that your fellowship or faction own, if you take away that tile that's connecting that piece of land up, the opponent will not be able to hit the tile and again will just march straight home. Both of these can be excellent tips in war, as you don't require to use a strong commander to pull it off. So what you can do is you can use a siege army or a very low level paver army just to take the tiles, and what that'll do is then bounce your opponent's strong commanders that are coming in for war and send them straight back. So your opponent will have used stamina on their strongest army, and all you've used is a small amount of stamina on a very weak army that you'd never go to war with anyway. One little known trick that a lot of people don't make enough use of is that you can actually bounce people after they've entered a draw. So if an opponent's army attacks a tile and enters a draw, beginning the 5-minute time counter, if in that time you take away all of the surrounding connecting tiles, when the draw concludes, your opponent's army will bounce and be sent home without finishing the battle. In war, bouncing opponents' armies and avoiding being bounced yourself can often massively turn the tide of war, as stamina is one of the most precious resources. You could have the strongest army you want, but if you have no stamina, you're not going to be able to place your mark on the battlefield. One thing to bear in mind is if an opponent's army is approaching from further than 3 minutes away, don't try and execute a bounce manoeuvre immediately. Instead, wait for them to get more than 3 minutes into their march, then execute your bounce manoeuvre. The reason for this is, within the first 3-minute window of marching, your opponent can actually cancel their march and recall the commander, and for doing so they get 10 stamina points back. However, outside of this 3-minute window, they cannot do so. So you want to waste as much of their stamina as possible and not allow them to do that recall. Tip number 5 is to scan your opponent's army before you send a commander to attack them. What this means is you need to try and find out what army your opponent is using in advance of sending your main battle commander. This would then allow you to send a commander that best counters your opponent's army. There are multiple ways you can do this. The easiest way, of course, is just to use one of the new ring skills, Clairvoyance. What this skill does is, for the cost of 2 ability points, will show you 2 armies contained on a tile. However, 2 ability points is actually quite expensive, particularly when this is such a finite resource and can be used, for example, for mock battling your commanders. So you're effectively almost losing your self-experience by doing this. But it can be very useful for knowing exactly what you're up against and for seeing not just the top army, but a second army underneath if there are multiple opponents stacked up. The second way to do this is you can just send a scout. What this means is you just send a low-level commander with as few troops as possible, a single command or less, and you send them up against the opponent's commander so you gain a battle report. You can then look at the battle report, see what your opponent's using, and send an army specifically to counter them. You'll lose a few hundred troops, but you'll have gained valuable information, and compared to clairvoyance, you'll have saved 2 ability points. However, of course, if there's 2 armies stacked on the same tile, you will not get a battle report of the second one, so that will still remain a mystery, and for that, clairvoyance is probably more effective. Normally with a scout, you would use the quickest unit possible so that you can travel from tile to tile as quickly as possible. But another tip I see very much lesser used is to actually use a commander such as Isildur or Frodo and Sam, who are able to inflict madness on the opponent, and then using these with an army composition of, say, sentinels and marksmen at minimum command, so that they can avoid a few instances of damage. What you can then do with this is they will inflict madness on the opponent's troops, and for the cost of only a couple of hundred of your own troops, you can take out a few thousand of the opposition, so your scout is not just completely wasted, he can actually cause loss to your opponent. This is always a hilarious way to meme your opponent and hinder him at exactly the same time. Scouts can also be very effectively used as bait in war. So what this means is, if you're at the front of a pack of your own troops pushing into enemy lands, or at the front of being pushed, what you can do is you can send a scout to take 2 or 3 tiles in front of the enemy commanders. And then you can either recall your scout or leave him there as bait so your opponent's commander then hits it. What will then happen when the opponent attacks you is, of course, you'll start generating battle reports. These then allows you to look at the opponent's commanders and suitably identify a counter. Similar to the scouting, but just drawing the opponents onto you first, which can sometimes save you stamina. And the last thing you can do with scouts, which can be very effective, is using them to block your opponent's advance. With this, you just use the low-level commanders to take tiles close to the enemy in order to activate the couple of minutes protection on the tiles. This is particularly useful with fast units like cavalry or fell beast, and you can just dance around the enemy taking tiles and slowing them down at every opportunity. This could then mean that they use stamina on their best commanders, chasing you down or trying to retake these tiles. Tip number 6 is utilising a method called the soft switch. So if you're fighting on the tiles with an enemy and you've already killed their army, so they know what commander you have, you can be sure that the next thing they do is to send a hard counter and you'll likely lose the battle. When they do, if you go to the reinforcement window and just drop all of your troops down to the bare minimum so you only have a single command, you effectively turn your commander into a scout. You can then use that hit, without losing any troops, to see what he's sent after you, and then you can send your own counter back to him. So you effectively just allow yourself to get a look at your opponent's army. Of course, your commander, which might be one of your strong commanders, will then get sent back to your fort or settlement with a 15-minute recharge before he can re-enter, along with needing to be reinforced. So this method is most effectively used if they're being sent back to your settlement, which is in very close vicinity. You can also utilise this soft switch to very quickly clear an area. So let's say you've killed an enemy and now you have a lot of low power tiles around that you need to clear as quickly as possible to stop the enemy's friends from coming over and pushing you straight away. If you go to the reinforce screen and just immediately remove all of your heaviest troops, leaving only a few command of the lightest troops, you'll have much quicker march times and can use that to very quickly then march around the nearby tiles and clear them before the opponent can get to you. Tip number 7 follows on very closely to the last tip, and I would call this the hard switch. So say your enemy has scouted your army and sent their own after you. You can guarantee that what's about to hit you is likely to be a counter for what they've scouted. So what you need to do is change up your army from what they've seen. If your base is nearby, you can quickly use the reinforce window to change to another build. Obviously in some commanders this may not be possible, but for example if you had a commander like Theoden and you were using an all melee build, you could quickly switch to, say, a Bow Knight's build, primarily focused on damage dealt by the Bow Knight unit, and that's a completely different army composition from what they've scouted. So once they send out their counter, they could be almost shocked to discover that you've now switched and now you could quite often counter them. Of course, this is quite a hard trick to do, as you have to have good knowledge of what counters each commander to know what to switch to and what the opponent has likely sent. Tip number 8 is around army compositions, and you might have seen me mention something similar to this in a few of my commander guides. If the commander that you're sending into battle only utilises 1 or 2 different troops, what I would recommend is tactically using the third set of troops and leaving them on minimum command. So one of the things that I usually recommend is to use a single command of either marksmen or sentinels. The reason for this being is that they have the avoidance trait. So what will happen is an opponent's attack, for example if a high damage commander like Gimli or Aragorn hits you and they hit their commander damage into your single command of marksmen or sentinels, the most units they can kill is that single command. There isn't, say, like overflow damage onto the rest of your units. So this means you might have lost 100 of those, but it could have saved you losing, 200, 300 of a different type of troop. And on top of that, if you use marksmen or sentinels and they have the avoidance trait, they might even be able to take 2 instances of damage. So this therefore massively spares you taking damage on higher value troops or your damage dealing troops. Another way to utilise this is to actually use an extremely high speed troop as your third troop. So for example, if you're in the evil faction, you could put a troop such as a tracker as your third troop at minimum command. If you later win a battle and utilise the soft switch technique, you could drop all of your other troops and leave yourself just with the trackers, which are extremely fast, and you can then very quickly clear the surrounding tiles, and you have almost lost nothing from your army by doing so. I find this to be a lesser used but no less effective technique in war. My next tip is how to very quickly get your commanders to return to base during war. Sometimes you need your commander and your troops back to base as soon as possible, so you can either use those troops on another unit or change your troop composition and get back into the fight. What you can do to speed up your troops return is if you go to the reinforce screen before recalling your commander and drop all of the army's command down to minimum. Once you accept that, all of those troops are now back in your base immediately with no travel time. To make the commander himself come back quicker, what you can do is you can delete all troops on that commander or all the slowest troops, leaving only the fastest unit behind. Now when you recall your commander, he will march significantly faster and be much quicker back at base. When you're recalling your commanders to your settlement, you should always do this, as you never know when you might need him and can also save you many recalling speed up items. Next tip we have is how to safely reinforce when you're in the heart of battle. When your commander needs reinforcements but is at risk of being hit by an enemy commander, and when he's a depleted army he will likely lose, causing you to lose a large number of troops. What you can do to make this a lot safer is hit the reinforce button, but before you maximise your troops or set up the composition how you like, drop every troop command to minimum and then click the accept button. Now go back into the reinforce screen and you'll see he still has minimum troops. Put your troop composition in back how you want it to be, and then you'll see that if you get hit, all you'll lose is those single commands of armies rather than the semi-full army that you had before, so you lose significantly less troops. This makes reinforcing much safer and over the course of a long battle can leave you with thousands extra troops. And for my last tip in this video, I would always recommend checking the public battle report logs. To do this, you just check your mail and on the little drop down in the top left, you switch from Tactician to Fellowship. This then allows you to see all the times that your Fellowship mates have attacked another faction's tile or been attacked by another faction on their own tile. So what you can do is you can use this to see what enemy commanders are where and send appropriate counters to them. This saves you from having to use a scout to find it out yourself through your own report logs, and saves you stamina and time. Therefore meaning you can act decisively and quickly and can sometimes turn the tide in a tough battle. And with that, that's the last of all my beginner basics tips. I really hope you've enjoyed, and I really hope these will be effective for you and help your faction win in their future wars. Of course, if you're ever in my server and you come up against me, feel free to disregard every one of these and make it easier on me. Anyway, with that, I'm going to leave you, and I really hope to see you on the next one.